Welcome to this video in the Unity Basics series where we are going to learn about functions, if statements, for loops, and while loops inside of C#. You see here that I have the C# script. I have a C# script open and not the Unity editor open because that means in this script in this video we are going to be working just inside of our coding editor. You see here I have a sample script made and there are a few things already here. There is a void start and a void update. These two things are called functions. You can see here that there are these green texts, and it says start is called before the first frame update, and update is called once per frame. And that's just telling you what these methods do. Start and update are both Unity methods that only work inside of Unity because we're having the using Unity engine namespace up at the top, so we are allowed to use all of the methods inside of Unity. So we can use different Unity methods about rigid bodies and colliders and things like that. But to make something like this, we're going to first just type 2 slashes, and then we can type a comment. So if I want to type something that this means that, I can type that so that I know that when I'm typing my next thing, that this means that. The comments are just for the person coding and not for the computer to read. These things, void start and void update, they are called functions, and the way to create them is by typing either private or public. Public functions or methods can be called from outside of the script and be called from another script or another game object, but private functions cannot be called from other ones. And then you're going to type the thing that the function will return. For right now, we can just put void and then the name of your method. I'm just going to write method, and then you're going to have these parentheses right here, and then you'll have curly braces to open up your method. Inside of your method, you can do whatever you want. I'm just going to create a few variables up at the top, just test variables that we can play around with. So I'm going to make a private float, test float. I'm going to set this equal to 1.234. I'm going to create a private integer, a test int, and set this equal to 5, a private string, a test string, and I'll set this equal to string. And there you go, those are just 3 test variables that I have right here. Inside of method, I can do something that test float ++, and ++ is just short writing for test float plus 1. So whenever this is called, we will add 1 to our test float. So if I call this method inside of update, so if I go inside of this function and type out my function name, which will then call this method, so since this is inside of update and update is called once per frame, every single frame this function will be called and test float will go up by 1, which is pretty cool. So you can create things that go in these different methods. But we can talk about how that methods can return different things. If I change this void to, let's say, an integer, then it's going to want this to return an integer. So to do that, we'll just type the keyword return, and then we can return really whatever we want. We can return our test float after we add it. But it's going to give us a little error here because we're looking for an integer and we're giving it a float, so we can just type in our test integer, and then this is correct. For this little word in between our private and our name, this is just what the method will return. If void, it will return nothing. So there are a few more things that we can do inside of methods to make our code a little bit nicer, and one of them is if statements. To do an if statement, you'll type if, parentheses, and then brackets. Inside of this parenthesis, you have true or not. So what I can do is I could do if my test float is greater than my test integer. If my test float is bigger than my test integer right here, then this method will go, then this if statement will be called, and the things that are inside here will be called. So if my test float is bigger than my test integer, then I'll just, let's say I can take my test integer and I'll add a 1 to it. And if you're wondering, the reason that this is grayed out is it because I have it after this return statement in this integer method, meaning this won't be called ever, because after the return it gets out of the method, so this statement will never be called. You can do this if test float is bigger than the test int. If you put an equal sign after it, it will be if test float is greater than or equal to test integer. You can also do and or statements. So if test float is greater than or equal to the test integer, or, which I'll do by typing these two straight up slashes, I could do or test integer is greater than 1, something like that. And then if I want to do an and, I would say two and symbols. So if test float is greater than or equal to test integer, or test integer is greater than 1 and test float is greater than 1. So if both of these things are true, then we will go to this thing, which is just adding 1 to our test integer. The next thing I'd like to talk about inside of our code is for loops. For loops are just loops that will cycle through every single object inside of a loop. So we can go in our method, let's just delete this, and then we can turn the return value back to void, so it doesn't have to return anything. And you can see that I'll make our little error go away. And here we can just type for, and then it's going to look for a few things. I'm going to do an integer I and set it equal to 0, semicolon, I is less than a number, so we can just write for. Now I'm just going to do my test integer, and then we're going to do I plus plus. And then we can do our braces. This is the basis for all for loops. And what this will do is we'll set another integer and set an integer and set it to 0. Then it will check if our integer is less than the number of things that we have. I'm setting this to test integer right here, but what more likely would be happen, you would have some sort of public lists. So if I have a public list of integers, we can call this our integer list. And then what I'll do down here is instead of test int, I will do integer list dot length, and it will just check the length of our integer list. So if there's 5 integers in it, it will be 6, because 0 is a number in the list too. So it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is 6 numbers. And then what you'll want to do is you'll do something with the number I. So we can do our int list at the position of I. So if I is equal to 0 and 0 is less than this, then our integer list right here, it will just give us the number at the position of 0. So we can just do something like a debug.log here to just give us the position, or just to give us the number, or every single number inside of our list at a frame that we want to. For loops are really helpful for things just like going through lists and checking if a certain thing has a certain tag, or if you'd like to check if an enemy has a certain amount of health, and then you can just kill that enemy if it has 0 health. For loops are great for things like that. Another thing we can do inside of our code is while loops. While loops are made by typing while with parentheses and then gear brackets. Whiles just do something every single time that something is true. If you want to do something forever, you can just do while true, and this will just keep on being true, because every while true just means all the time because it's checking while something is true, and if true is true, it will do that thing. If you want to do something never, you can just do while is false. You can also do something just like we can just do test int is greater than test float. And when test int is greater than test float, it will do this thing, which is really helpful for just game loops that will go on whenever you have your game open or your player has more than one health. Then this while loops are really helpful because they're just going to be keep on doing something over and over while a certain condition is true. With that, that is the end of this Unity tutorial. If you like this tutorial, please give our channel a like and a subscribe, and share this video with somebody that you think would find it useful. Thank you.